Redfield, Arizona was one of those towns people passed through without slowing down. A single main road cut through sunburned buildings, a diner that closed too early, and storefronts that looked busy only from a distance. To outsiders, it felt quiet and harmless. To the people who lived there, silence had become a habit learned the hard way. Harold Klein and Richard Morrow had ruled Redfield for decades. Both men were nearing 70, neatly dressed and endlessly polite in public. Harold had once held a county position and still carried himself like authority followed him everywhere. Richard owned half the rental properties in town and controlled who stayed and who left. Their names appeared on charity boards and plaques, but their real power lived in whispers and warnings. Workers knew better than to argue over unpaid wages. Tenants knew not to complain about sudden rent hikes or unsafe buildings. Anyone who tried usually regretted it. Complaints disappeared. Witnesses changed stories. Fear filled the gaps where justice should have been. On a scorching afternoon, that fear finally cracked. Evan Cole, a 24-year-old mechanic, had just closed the hood of a pickup when two men walked into his shop. They weren't customers. They wore pressed shirts and confident smiles, the kind that didn't ask permission. Evan recognized them instantly, Richard's men. They accused him of stealing parts from one of Richard's properties. Evan refused to sign a false confession. He knew the accusation was meant to force him into falsifying invoices later, just like others had done before him. When he stood his ground, the men dragged him outside, shoving him against the concrete. Evan's sister, Lily, who helped manage the shop, pulled out her phone and started recording. She barely had time to speak before Harold Klein himself stepped forward from across the street. With a sharp slap, the phone flew from her hand and skidded across the pavement. "You want to keep your business?" Harold asked calmly. "Then you forget this ever happened." People watched from windows. No one intervened, except someone had noticed. Across the street, a group of bikers had stopped for gas, 6 motorcycles, dusty from long miles. Their leather vests carried a simple emblem, an iron-winged vulture. They were members of the Iron Vultures Motorcycle Club, a group with a reputation that made people uneasy, but a record that stayed clean. Their president, Jack Mercer, stood beside his bike, helmet under his arm. He didn't move when Evan was shoved to the ground. He didn't shout or threaten. He just watched, memorizing faces, listening to words meant to intimidate. When the men left, Jack crossed the street. He helped Evan to his feet, picked up the broken phone, and handed Lily some cash without a word. Only then did he ask a single question. "How long has this been happening?" The answer came fast, heavy, and raw. Evan talked. Lily talked. A few others nearby finally spoke up. Voices shaw. The Iron Vultures didn't return to Redfield the next day, or even the next week. If Harold Klein and Richard Morrow were expecting a loud confrontation, they were disappointed. What came instead was something far more unsettling. Silence, followed by movement they couldn't trace. Jack Mercer believed that real damage to corruption didn't come from fists, but from light, and light took preparation. Members of the club began passing through Redfield in pairs, never drawing attention. Some stayed overnight. Some talked to locals. They drank coffee at the diner, rented rooms, and listened more than they spoke. Stories repeated themselves with uncomfortable consistency. Unpaid overtime, sudden evictions, threats disguised as favors. Fear had trained people to speak softly, but once they realized someone was listening without judgment, the words started to flow. One of the Iron Vultures, a former paralegal named Susan Hale, began quietly filing public records requests. Property transactions linked to Richard Morrow didn't add up. Buildings were transferred between shell companies for prices that made no sense. Another member, a retired accountant, traced payments that disappeared into accounts that weren't supposed to exist. Everything was legal to collect, clean and documented. Meanwhile, Harold Klein felt the shift before he understood it. Tenants stopped backing down when his representatives knocked. Workers asked questions they'd never dared to ask before. A local journalist requested records related to an old zoning decision Harold had pushed through years ago. At first, Harold laughed it off. Then he made calls. The sheriff didn't return them. Richard noticed it next. Anonymous letters began arriving at his properties, clearly written by someone who understood tenant law better than he did. People he'd bullied for years suddenly had confidence. One woman refused to move out and quoted statutes he'd never heard her use before. "This town is turning," Richard muttered to Harold during a private meeting. "Someone's behind it. They just didn't know who." The invitation arrived on a Thursday afternoon. No threats, no demands, just a location, an abandoned roadside lodge outside town, and a time. The paper was crisp, the message clear. Ignoring it didn't feel like an option. They arrived just before sunset, their expensive car kicking dust into the fading light. The lodge was quiet, but the dirt road leading to it was lined with motorcycles, parked neatly, deliberately. Men and women stood nearby, relaxed, hands visible, expressions unreadable. Jack Mercer stepped forward alone. He didn't insult them. He didn't accuse. He laid out facts, addresses, dates, transactions, names, of people who had already agreed to testify. He explained that evidence had been shared with state-level investigators and journalists who had no ties to Redfield. "This isn't a threat," Jack said evenly. "It's a reality check." Harold tried authority. It failed. Richard tried. The consequences came faster than anyone in Redfield expected. Within weeks, unmarked state vehicles appeared on the outskirts of town, then in front of offices that had once seemed untouchable. Investigators moved quietly but decisively, armed with warrants backed by months of verified documentation. Files were seized, accounts were frozen, properties were flagged for review. The protection Harold Klein and Richard Morrow had relied on for decades vanished overnight. The courtroom was the first place where the illusion of control finally collapsed. Harold arrived in a tailored suit, posture stiff, eyes darting toward doors that never opened for him. Richard sat beside him, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles whitened. One by one, witnesses took the stand, former employees, tenants, small business owners. Their stories were measured, detailed, and consistent. There was no shouting, no drama, just facts laid out in steady voices that no longer trembled. Evidence followed. Bank records, property transfers, recorded statements, patterns of intimidation that painted a picture too complete to ignore. The judge listened in silence, expression hardening with every page turned. When Harold attempted to speak, his practiced confidence deserted him. He talked about misunderstandings, about contributions to the town, about his age and health. None of it changed the facts. When the charges were read aloud, his shoulders slumped, and for the first time, he looked small. Richard avoided eye contact entirely. The man who once decided people's futures, with a phone call, now flinched at the sound of his own name. Outside the courtroom, Redfield breathed differently. The diner stayed open later. Conversations grew louder. Evan Cole reopened his shop with community support, refusing offers that would have put him back under someone else's control. Lily enrolled in evening classes, her confidence restored, along with her sense of safety. Properties once owned by Richard were placed under new management. Repairs were made, rent stabilized. People who had lived in fear for years slept more easily, knowing that intimidation had finally met accountability. The Iron Vultures were never mentioned in any official record. They didn't attend hearings or give interviews. Their work had always been about leaving things better than they found them, not taking credit. When the town held a small celebration in the park, no one invited them and no one needed to. Their absence said enough. On a clear morning, the rumble of engines echoed briefly through Redfield one last time. The Iron Vultures stopped at the edge of town, helmets on, bikes idling. Jack Mercer looked back at the streets that no longer felt weighed down by fear. "People stood up," one rider said. Jack nodded. They just needed space to do it. They rode out without ceremony, leaving behind a town reclaimed by its own courage. Harold Klein and Richard Morrow would spend